Hello, Stirumps Hello Promis. Thi Patriot missile alusan, and Thi Priorian o fire over Ukraine. Another day, and once again, Russian ballistic missiles rip through the Kyiv skyline, delivering devastating strikes straight into the Holosivsky district. Down south, in the Odessa region, the strategic port infrastructure of the agricultural giant, Colonel, in Kornomorsk, has just been reduced to a smoldering pile of ash. Russia's lethal Iskander-M ballistic missiles are slicing through the airspace, completely defying all interception efforts and pushing Ukraine's air defense network to the brink of absolute collapse. But beyond the smoke and ruins, we must look at two shocking numbers currently making headlines: 2,000 and 770. These two numbers expose a brutal reality on the Eastern European battlefield, a reality that no Western media campaign can possibly spin away. Even Ukrainian military experts themselves now admit that to survive this relentless rain of Russian fire, Kyiv needs at least 2,000 Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missiles every single year. But here is the catch. The entire defense industry of the United States and its allies, running at maximum capacity day and night, can only squeeze out about 770 missiles annually on a global scale. The extreme exhaustion of the Western-supplied air defense network is now fully exposed. So what does this lethal loophole tell us? Is the West completely powerless against Russia's monstrous military production machine? Or is the Kyiv elite deliberately dragging out this conflict, turning the sacrifice of their own citizens into an endless gold mine? Let's find out in today's episode of Battle Cry. Believe it or not.ca mathematical, D at the end. Welcome back, everyone. In modern warfare, empty slogans cannot replace actual firepower. And actual firepower is dictated solely by the production capacity of a nation's defense industry. To understand why Ukraine's air defense system is choking and on the verge of collapse, let's do some very simple math based on the figures provided by Alexander Kovalenko, a prominent Ukrainian military political analyst. Kovalenko has exposed a heartbreaking truth. Ukraine's bare minimum requirement is 2,000 Patriot PAC-3 missiles per year. Why such a massive number? Because they are facing a Russian military machine that is operating like a runaway tank. Just look at the 9 M723 ballistic missiles used for the notorious Iskander-M system. Russia is currently churning them out at a staggering rate of about 3 missiles per day. Multiply that, and you have more than 1,000 Iskander-M ballistic missiles rolling off the assembly lines every single year. That is a production speed that has left the entire NATO bloc in absolute shock. But the real killer is the interception ratio. To successfully shoot down a single ballistic missile screaming toward its target at hypersonic speed, Ukraine cannot just fire one PAC-3. They have to launch 2 or even 3 interceptors to guarantee a hit. This means that to counter Russia's 1,000 Iskanders, Kyiv needs between 2,000 and 3,000 Patriot missiles. And is the West capable of supplying this? The answer is absolutely not. The primary producer of the PAC-3 is the United States, where Lockheed Martin can only manufacture about 700 of these missiles per year. Across the Pacific, Japan, producing under license through Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, adds a meager 70 missiles to the pile. The global total of PAC-3 production, the absolute pride of the West, stands at just 770 per year. This is vastly below the critical survival threshold of 2,000 that Ukraine desperately needs. Kovalenko bitterly admitted that those 70 missiles representing Japan's entire annual output are only enough for Ukraine to defend against one single, large-scale Russian raid on the capital of Kyiv. A raid where Russia launches 20 to 30 ballistic missiles. Think about that. Just one heavy attack can completely wipe out the yearly production of a major global ally. The sheer scale of this deficit is mind-blowing. And remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Those 2,000 PAC-3 missiles are only calculated to deal with the Iskander-M. But Moscow's military arsenal does not stop there. They are constantly raining down uninterceptable weapons like the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, the Zircon hypersonic cruise missile, and they are even converting their S-400 air defense missiles into ballistic land attack weapons. To have even a slight chance of stopping any of these, Ukraine must rely on the Patriot, which means their actual demand is far greater than 2,000 missiles. The consequences of this deficit are clearly visible on the ground. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has been forced to admit that their interception rate against ballistic missiles has plummeted to a tragic 40%. In fact, in recent massive strikes, where Russia saturated the airspace with ballistic weapons, Ukraine's defense network was completely pierced, failing to intercept a single incoming missile. To save himself, President Zelensky is now desperately clinging to a paper project, a medium-range ballistic missile defense system called Frezha, which supposedly involves several European nations. A Ukrainian private defense company called FP has made the hollow promise that they will begin mass-producing the Frezha missile by August of 2026. But let's be realistic. Can a project that currently exists only on paper, with zero physical infrastructure, ever hope to fill the massive void left by the Russian military machine? Never. The West's exhaustion is an undeniable fact, exposing the ultimate danger of relying entirely on foreign arms. Patriot, I'll use an anti reality ont groaned. Seeing the collapse of Ukraine's air defense, the West has resorted to psychological games to pacify their ally. At the recent NATO summit in Ankara, US President Donald Trump made a grand announcement. The United States would grant Ukraine a license to produce the Patriot system locally. This promise was thrown out like a lifesaver, but in reality, it is nothing more than a giant political illusion, a magic trick. The moment Trump uttered those words, the two American defense giants, Lockheed Martin and RTX Corporation, were left completely stunned. They had never been consulted, nor did they have any such plan. For a country currently being torn apart by war, to reverse engineer and manufacture the most advanced missile technology on Earth is pure fantasy. A veteran Ukrainian drone operator recently threw cold water on these wild dreams. He used a very powerful historical example. At the end of the Second World War, the Soviet Union secretly acquired a crashed American B-29 bomber. To reverse engineer it and create their own copy, the Tu-4, the Soviets had to mobilize an overwhelming force. 150,000 of their finest minds, 900 factories and research institutes, all working at peak capacity for 2 whole years. And as he pointed out, the Patriot PAC-2 and PAC-3 systems are 10,000 times more complex than a B-29 bomber from the 1940s. Manufacturing a ballistic missile interceptor requires an immense industrial ecosystem. From specialized alloy materials, ultra-precision forging tools, advanced aerospace electronics, to highly sensitive solid propellants. Most importantly, it requires tens of thousands of highly skilled engineers. Where is Ukraine going to find these resources today? Their heavy industrial infrastructure has been almost completely destroyed. Their experts have either fled the country as refugees or are fighting on the front lines. They do not have 2 years of peace to conduct research. So, how can they possibly build Patriots? Even Western experts are shaking their heads. A former commander of U.S. forces in Europe, someone who is openly anti-Russian, admitted that these promises of local Patriot production should not be taken seriously. He emphasized that Ukraine needs air defense right now, not some illusion 3 or 5 years down the road. Gustav Gressel, an official from the Austrian Military Academy, pointed to Germany as an example. Even though Germany was granted a license to produce the older Patriot PAC-2 back in 2022, they are only now preparing to start production, and they do not expect to be fully operational until 2028. If Germany, the #1 industrial powerhouse in Europe, needs 6 years to set up a licensed production line, how can Ukraine, while dodging daily airstrikes, expect to do it? And here is the most lethal point of all. Any factory, any facility that even attempts to mass-produce advanced weapons on Kyiv-controlled territory will immediately become target #1 for Russian long-range precision strikes. There is not a single square inch of land in Ukraine that is safe from Moscow's missiles. If anyone still doubts Russia's ability to destroy infrastructure, just look at the hurricane of fire that swept through Kornomorsk near Odessa just a few days ago. The target was the massive plant and storage facilities of Kernel, the largest exporter of sunflower oil and grain in Ukraine. This is a corporate giant that controls 10% of the global sunflower oil market, exporting 8 million tons in 2025. The Russian strikes were terrifyingly precise. The silos, the storage tanks, and the entire power grid feeding the complex were completely obliterated. As a result, 9,000 tons of sunflower oil and 45,000 tons of wheat went up in smoke. The plant has been forced to shut down indefinitely. That is the terrifying reality of Russian firepower. The cold-blooded business of war. Russian history has proven an eternal truth. The more pressure and external threats they face, the more united the Russian people become. The Ukrainian drone strikes inside Russian territory have not terrified the Russian population, nor have they made them want to surrender. On the contrary, it has ignited a fierce sense of national pride and anger. The Russian public is now demanding that their government strike Ukraine with even greater force. They are complaining that the military is being far too soft on the Kyiv regime. For instance, on the morning of July 14th, immediately after Ukraine and 9 European nations announced a new missile defense alliance, Russian ballistic missiles promptly rained down on Kyiv's Holozivsky district. But while the Russian people stand united to protect their national security, on the other side of the trenches, the Kyiv elite and the military-industrial profiteers are busy playing a cold-blooded financial game. Denis Stetsenko, the co-founder of the private military contractor FP, made a shocking and blunt statement. He openly declared, "The end of this war would be a financial tragedy for Ukraine." Yes, you heard that correctly. While tens of thousands of young Ukrainian men are dying in muddy trenches, the war profiteers view peace as a disaster. Why? Because if the war ends, the multi-billion-dollar Western aid packages will stop flowing directly into their pockets. Stetsenko did not stop there. He went on to paint a disturbing picture of the future, stating, "If we win, we will not just sell weapons, we will sell our own security, we will sell our independence in security." To put it plainly, the Kyiv elite wants to turn the entire nation of Ukraine and the blood of their own citizens into a massive, privatized global mercenary company. They want to lease out young Ukrainians as hired guns for the interests of what they call the modern European empire. Whoever writes the check gets Ukrainian lives sent to the front lines. It is this exact mindset, selling out the lives of an entire nation in exchange for bloody defense contracts and lucrative business licenses, that explains why the Kyiv regime refuses to engage in serious peace negotiations. As Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov pointed out, the West is only pretending to be ready for talks while actually delivering ultimatums. The well of goodwill and hope has run completely dry. Russia knows very well that as long as this militaristic regime in Kyiv and blood merchants like Stetsenko remain in power, Ukraine will never be more than a puppet on a string, a tool used by the West to fight Russia, down to the very last Ukrainian.